This is breaking news. Welcome to the Daily Bugle. Make sure the kids are fast asleep, because we come to you today with horrifying news about the Vigilante, Spider-Man. After the shocking video where we see the masked villain murder the superhero known as Mysterio, we come to you with the results of an investigation into the terrifying Spider. The criminal known as Peter Parker is far from his first offense against the law, and something tells me he won't stop until he's put behind bars. So brace yourselves, because we're about to reveal the dark truths behind one of the Avengers. When Peter Parker was only given $100 after winning that wrestling match against Bonesaw, instead of the promised $3,000, little did he know that the money was the least of his worries that day. Feeling cheated by the clandestine wrestling tournament's organizer, he literally let an armed robber run away with all the money, without even trying to stop him. While not really a criminal offense, deciding to mind his own business in that matter will have direct and permanent consequences for the future of Spider-Man. In what can only be defined as instant karma, the criminal ran into Uncle Ben when leaving the building, and ended up shooting him to steal his car. This event, which will scar Spider-Man for pretty much forever, will only solidify Uncle Ben saying, "With great power comes great responsibility." But as I discussed throughout today's video, Peter doesn't always follow that motto, and either abuses or misuses his powers from time to time. While debatable, poor Uncle Ben can be seen as Spider-Man's first victim in a long list of collateral damage. Wrong place, wrong time. Baron Helmut Zemo, the mastermind behind the King of Wakanda's death, and the man responsible for igniting the Avengers' civil war, has warned us more than once about the dangers of superheroes. These people literally think that they're above the law, and I would go to the extent to say that they think they are the law. And Spider-Man is no different from others in that category, my friends. While this is a small offense against bigger ones, Spider-Man has been seen breaking and entering many buildings, or even cars, to pursue his agenda. In Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man, the Spider-Man played by Andrew Garfield tries to stop a car burglar from getting away with quite a fancy car. While the thief succeeds in breaking into the car and is about to drive away with it, Spider-Man ironically commits the crime before the criminal, waiting for him in the back seat. Spider-Man has already broken the law by getting in the car. What follows might be funny to some extent, but it's also quite creepy. And Spider-Man comes off as someone who thinks he's above the law and enjoys it a little bit too much. One of the most tragic moments in Spider-Man comics clearly goes to the death of Peter's former girlfriend, Gwen Stacy. While Gwen has sort of come back on the big screen in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, things didn't go so well for that character played by Emma Stone in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Following similar events found in the comic book, while changing the location of the Brooklyn Bridge to a clock tower, the 2014 movie reenacts Gwen's infamous death scene. While Spider-Man is fighting the Green Goblin inside the top part of the clock tower, Gwen is only holding on to a thread, literally. But as the web she's holding on to breaks, and the clock's mechanism falls apart, she falls down a few stories high. In one unforgettable slow-motion sequence, Spider-Man dives right in to save her, and fortunately grabs her at the very last minute. The problem is, she seems to have hit her head. But also that even if she hadn't, the pull from the web might have just snapped her neck and back. By putting her into constant danger and acting carelessly, Spider-Man committed involuntary manslaughter. After Uncle Ben's tragic death at the hand of a thief, Spider-Man started his career as a mass vigilante and made pretty much every small crime in town his problem. While this might act as a form of therapy for the grieving Peter, taking the law into his own hands is not quite legal, as far as I'm concerned. Spider-Man is constantly not minding his business, even if the authorities are working towards grabbing whoever is causing a commotion. While there are tons of examples of the sorts, let's take a look at the car chase sequence in Sam Raimi's 2004 Spider-Man 2. When two police cars crashed after trying to catch some criminals, Spider-Man stepped in. But he did that while two thugs kept shooting at him as he was slinging his way in the air. The problem is, tons of those bullets got into people's apartments as we hear glass shattering, which means that by trying to avoid getting shot, he might have caused a few casualties along the way. The body count keeps rising. Harry Osborn was at home, minding his own business, just pouring himself a nightcap when Spider-Man shows up. He couldn't knock or call his old friend, no. He just came through the window without any warning. Granted, Peter was somehow under the influence of the symbiote, but at this point, Spider-Man is running out of excuses for his many failures. And don't let me get started on that horrible emo hairstyle. Anyways, the two start brawling over Mary Jane, punches are exchanged, they both get thrown across the room, and finally end up in Norman Osborn's secret lair behind a mirror. Spider-Man seems to have regained his senses for just a second. However, he purposely put Harry in the way of Green Goblin's out-of-control glider, which sends him flying across the room and into a collection of pumpkin bombs. Sure, Harry threw one of those bombs at Peter, and obviously missed, but Peter didn't just evade the weapon. He grabbed it with his spiderwebs and threw it right back at Harry, leaving him for dead. Symbiote Spider-Man just turned around and simply walked away. Cold. Whenever superheroes like the Avengers are in town, it seems that they leave a lot of destruction in their wake. When the gang first teamed up in the 2012 film The Avengers, they left New York City in ruins. Things got even worse in the 2015 Avengers Age of Ultron, as Sokovia's capital city was literally turned into a crater because of Tony Stark's inability to get a hold of his own creation, the supervillain Ultron. Now an Avenger, Spider-Man brought his share of property destruction into the MCU so far. In Spider-Man Homecoming, the web-slinger's first solo film with the MCU, Peter Parker is partly responsible for destroying a boat full of people. The Vigilante hopped a ride on a ferry in order to stop a weapons deal, and in the process got into a fight with the Vulture. The problem with Spider-Man in this particular scene is that he jumped into action without much of a plan, causing some FBI agents to be thrown off the ferry. But things only got worse when instead of letting the Vulture go, he pulled the villain's weapon away from him and caused it to go haywire as it was dropped from the ferry. This caused the whole boat to be sliced in half, endangering everyone on board. If it weren't for the intervention of Iron Man, most of these people would have probably drowned. The ones that didn't get hit by those laser beams, that is. In another Spider-Man 3 scene where Peter Parker went dark, he almost takes the life of Flint Marko, aka Sandman. At the moment, Parker is just living the life, feeling powerful and gorgeous in his all-black costume, and the man is out for blood. After finding out that Sandman was the one who shot Uncle Ben that tragic night, Spider-Man stalks the villain in the subway and gives his all against the villain. Not holding back, the Dark Spidey kicks the man a few stories down, a bit like what happened to Gwen, but this time with a little bit more intention. He even goes to the extent of trying to tear Sandman apart using the coming train. If it weren't for Sandman's ability to turn into sand, that man would have been scattered into little pieces on the train tracks. Spider-Man's rage and lack of mercy reaches a whole new level when he realizes that water could somewhat dissolve his opponent. So, just like one of Marvel's supervillains, he chooses to try and end the Sandman without giving it a second thought. Not to stray too far from the topic, but does that mean Sandman hasn't showered since he broke out of prison? Ugh, I wouldn't want to go to that beach. When Marvel Comics wanted to turn the monstrous Venom into an anti-hero instead of a supervillain, they found a somewhat peaceful way to do so. He made a deal with Spider-Man so the bichrome superhero would leave him alone once and for all. It sounds quite unlikely that someone who calls themselves a hero would agree to let a sociopathic creature on the loose. But Venom had actually quite the argument to continue his rampage without being interrupted by Spidey. In exchange for his total freedom, the symbiote promised Peter to never come after him, and most importantly, after the ones he loved. Since Peter lost enough of those for a whole lifetime, I can understand why he would agree to this oversized enemy. But this also means that Venom could potentially endanger the same people Spider-Man vowed to protect. Turning a blind eye to Venom's carnage, while constantly being in the way of people like Doc Ock, Mysterio, or the Lizard, reeks of hypocrisy. Now, this one comes right out of a Walking Dead nightmare. On a dimension called Earth 2149, the planet was struck with some kind of plague, which turned humans into the living dead. And guess who showed up? Nope, not Rick Grimes, but the chainsaw-wielding Ash from the Evil Dead, who jumped into the Marvel Universe since the Necronomicon, or the Book of the Dead, caused the zombie apocalypse. It might have been expected of Spider-Man to fight off the undead, but in a turn of events, he turned into one, and ate Mary Jane, Aunt May, and made his way to the Daily Bugle to feast on J. Jonah Jameson. While Peter Parker would have never murdered Mary Jane and May on purpose, the fact that he made his way in zombie form to get Jameson hints that he wanted to end him all along, since Bruce Campbell, who plays Ash, and has played various cameos in Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, has been rumored to appear in Doctor Strange, The Multiverse of Madness, also directed by Raimi. Does this mean that we'll get to see a zombie-infested Earth 2149 on the big screen? Also, the Necronomicon shares a lot of similarities with the Darkhold. Coincidence? I think not. While we're talking about the Spider-Verse of madness, let me tell you about Earth 8351 Spider-Man. While the guy wears a pretty cool costume, which makes him look more like Deadpool than one of the Spider-Men, he's far from being a superhero. During a Russia mission with Wolverine, the two bonded and eventually went training together in isolated Alaska. The rogue spider became colder as time passed by, even abandoning his family and friends in order to protect them from his enemies. The no-kill rule was thrown out the window, and with the violent Wolverine as his influence, it's not really a surprise. Wolverine and Spider-Man finally became Black Ops assassins, working for the highest bidder. I'm really stuck on this idea of having Ash join the MCU, and since Deadpool has been confirmed as entering the cinematic universe for Deadpool 3, putting the two together would clearly make the dream team we've all been waiting for.